Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, let's do it. What's something that you have seen that you weren't supposed to see? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I used to do fire safety equipment inspections, installation, and sales too. I've only told my family this, and like my closest friends and brothers, I was doing an inspection for fire extinguishers in a funeral home, and this usually involves me inspecting the entire facility. Power plants were the best days. Just tons of walking and getting to see some pretty cool stuff when I worked for this company. But when I had to go to this funeral home, which I won't mention for good reason, I seriously had nightmares after that day. Walking with the owner, and full disclosure, working with the dead can tend to leave some people's communication skills with the living a bit off. I'd say he was taking me room by room and explaining how he got into the business, etc. And then it happened. We walked in a room, and a poor elderly woman was almost like floating in water due to rigor mortis, completely nude, having been recently worked on, and she was just floating on the table. Her arms and feet literally were at different heights, lifted in the air. Her head even was as if she were attempting to sit up. The owner apologized. But what could you really say to someone after something like that happens? Attending funerals was never really hard for me. I'm 26 now, was 23 then. The deceased was clothed, but of course, it wasn't the same. But this was just horribly different for me. I'm not fond of going to funerals now. I tend to not peer into the casket anymore. I kid you not, the woman was in my dreams the following night. I can still see her and picture the entire day in my mind. Back in high school, my friends and I used to skateboard in a church parking lot. One day we're hanging out, and this car comes tearing into the parking lot and drives over to a secluded corner. A lady gets out, goes to her trunk, and pulls out a gun. We think she's about to shoot herself, but then she notices us standing there. She paced back and forth a few times before getting back in the car and leaving. As soon as she left, we went across the street to a convenience store and called the police. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I am keeping some of the numbers fuzzy even though this case is already done and I can talk about it. One of my clients was picked up for drug trafficking and was guilty as hell. But in order to help himself out, he successfully set up a drug bust on a much bigger dealer. The DA's office had been slow to act on the case, and we could not figure out why, either me asking directly or him while sitting in jail. I had an idea, but no one would confirm what I thought was going on. I couldn't go and point blank ask around other defense attorneys, including the one for the guy who my client busted, because my client was a CI on the case. Were the other guy's cases to go to trial, my client would have to testify for the state. I learned what the hell was going on while I was intervening a different client in jail. I was sitting on the public side talking to my client over the phone. It just so happened a few feet away from me, in the private attorney room, was the defense attorney and the guy my client had busted, and they were both super pissed at each other. There's this thing called attorney-client privilege. The idea is that anything you say in private with your attorney is supposed to stay secret. But those attorney interview rooms are not soundproofed. And guess what? If you're going to be shouting at your client, your conversation suddenly isn't going to be privileged. Some things I learned. The defense attorney had no idea who my client was, and for whatever reason, his client was not giving up the name of my client to him. There might have been some trust issues there. They had wildly different opinions on the possible success of the case. Defense attorney's words: if you take this to trial and the CI says what is in this report, you're effed. The state had not disclosed to me said report. They had until the end of that week to make a decision about the case. I finished up my interview with my client while taking notes on both cases, as they were still in the middle of their argument. So, in one broad stroke, all because of a frayed or broken attorney-client relationship that spilled out into me being able to hear a few feet away, I learned pretty much all the information the DA's office had refused to tell me and why everyone had been dragging their feet. Soon after, I was able to use the information I received to resolve my own case. I grew up with separated parents, and my mother worked her ass off to provide us with the lifestyle we definitely didn't deserve. 60+ hours every week while my siblings and I fought constantly, verbally and physically. One Christmas we wanted a really expensive toy. Well, we went on a scavenger hunt to find it, and we did. As soon as we told her, she broke down in tears. I'll never forget the pure regret I felt in that moment. I felt like an absolute shithead, and still do. One day I'm going to provide my mother with everything she deserves, and more, and make sure she never has to lift a finger when she retires. After September 11th, I lived in an apartment in New Jersey, and one of my neighbors was a suspect. So, one morning around 4 a.m., I was on my way to a morning run, and when I opened the front door to my apartment to leave, there had to be 25 law enforcement officials, Secret Service, FBI, you name it. I walked directly into their apprehension of the guy and saw weapons I never knew existed. As a former Marine, I'm pretty decent with knowing weapons, plus I'm an enthusiast. They had chrome rifles with some weird wires I had never seen before and still haven't. Wasn't a magazine or any type of cartridge. After they got their guy, who turned out to be one of the guys involved, every law enforcement agent put their weapons in a weird case, and a single file weighted by a black van and deposited them. Funny thing is, I had a conversation with the dude's son on September 10th because he was supposed to fly back to Jordan where his son lived, and the kid laughed and said, "I would never fly tomorrow." In hindsight, the kid knew. Forgot to mention, they knew my name as soon as I opened the door. One radioed in that I was awake and leaving. They didn't bother me, but they were absolutely trying to hide those weapons. When I was a kid, I would say like 8 or 9, it was Christmas morning and I was so hyped. I think this was the year the Nintendo 64 released, and I just knew I was going to get one. So to say the least, I couldn't sleep. It was the middle of the night, and I wanted to sneak in there to look at the gifts. So I walked into the living room to see something that I couldn't forget. My mom on top of my dad, just going at it. I just look at them, not sure what is happening, and my dad peeks around my mom and says, "Won't you be asleep? Go back to bed. Santa hasn't come yet." The adult me realizes that he didn't mean Santa hasn't arrived with gifts. Back in 2012-ish, I ran a food truck in Chicago. Chicago apparently let the Restaurant Association practically write the food truck ordinance. The ordinance stated that trucks could only be parked for a total of 2 hours at a time. We needed more time than that to make the sales we needed to be profitable. My boss had a few restaurants, and the Restaurant Association wanted him as a member, so we got to sit in on a meeting and make our case about the parking time. During this meeting, they were having a discussion about how to kill the new minimum wage laws that were being discussed. It was like I was seeing the elite discuss how to keep the common people down, and it made me so incredibly angry. I used to live in a city built around the Middle Age, Perugia. You can look it up. And people who live in that kind of city know that they have a lot of narrow alleys where it's very unusual to see somebody. It wasn't very late, and I passed in one of those alleys to go to the center. There were 3 men. 2 of them rose up. The third one reached a pretty high hole in the wall, where he took or placed something, I'm not sure. They saw me and started mumbling something, so I acted like I didn't see anything. In my mind, I was freaking out, and passed by like it was nothing. Luckily, nothing happened. I woke from sleep at a hotel in Santa Fe, looking out my window. I saw 2 men with military haircuts and 2 women who looked to be their girlfriends. The girlfriends headed into the hotel with their bags, and the 2 guys were talking. Once the women were out of sight, one guy grabbed the other by the back of the neck and pulled him in for a really intimate kiss. They kissed for a bit, and then one of them got down on his knees and gave the other man a pretty good time from the looks of things. After they were done, they got up and walked close but increasingly distant physically from each other into the hotel. It made me really sad. It seemed like they wanted to be together, but couldn't give in the confines of culture and expectation. My parents asked me to take the trash out. I was in the middle of watching a movie with a friend, so I told them I'd do it afterwards. They're okay with that. About an hour later, the movie is over, and I get up to go into the kitchen to take the trash out. We have a door leading directly into the kitchen, but that corner had stuff standing there in it and was really narrow. So everyone walked through the living room and around the corner into the kitchen, which took a couple of seconds longer but was easier. I walk into the living room, and my mom is sitting topless on top of my dad, both of them shocked, and my mom quickly gets off and puts her shirt back on. I pretended not to see anything and walked into the kitchen. I squeezed through the kitchen door afterwards and couldn't look them in the eyes the next day. It was about 9:30 p.m. Anyone could have walked in there at any time, and they knew I was going to take the trash out. I have no idea what they were thinking. I don't know. I mean, the trauma of seeing that is palpable, right? But, they're people too, and you got here for a reason. I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong in this situation. Maybe they thought you were going to your room, or I don't know, but it's going to stay with you for a long time. Many years ago, some friends, a couple, asked my now ex-husband and me to help figure out what was wrong with their computer. When we were finally able to get it to boot up in safety mode to see what was wrong, we found that it was viruses, lots of viruses, probably from downloading all the bestiality porn that was everywhere, on top of just loads of porn in general. There was a lot of it just right there on the desktop, so it's not like we even had to snoop it all to find it. After just seeing what was on their desktop and in the unemptied recycling bin, we tried to look through only what we absolutely had to in order to get the job done. That was a pretty awkward conversation when we gave it back to them and had to explain what had happened and how we fixed it. From their reaction, they somehow thought we wouldn't see or find it, despite being in plain view. Way back in the day, before Wi-Fi, back before cell phones for ordinary people, getting online meant sitting at a desktop and waiting to connect. I wanted to connect to the internet and couldn't. Dad had been on the phone for hours. I had assumed he had forgotten to sign out and picked up the phone to be sure. Instead of hearing the grating internet sounds, I heard a woman talking. I distinctly heard my father say, "And would you kiss me?" So I hung up and calmly walked to his door and yelled at him. He cornered me and kept yelling that I had made it all up. This went on for hours until I agreed. Not long after, he left our family and pretty much cut off contact with us. I saw on Facebook recently that he took his wife, not my mom, her 40 and 45-year-old daughters, one of the daughters' husband, and their 2 children on a cruise. He can't be bothered to even pick up the phone and talk to my children. He's a piece of shit. I can't say it anywhere else, but I feel nothing but scorn for him and his vile wife. Okay, so this was back in 2012. I was working as a room cleaner at a well-known hotel on an island outside of Stockholm. We were having the then ruling government as a guest for some summer break conference thing. In Sweden, the government gets a couple weeks off in the summer. Anyways, I was going room to room cleaning, and I always knock if there is a "Don't Disturb" sign up to avoid awkward moments like walking in on someone in the shower, etc. I was almost done with my shift and had only the suite left to clean. I knocked on the door with no answer. The suite is really big, so it could be hard to hear if you were far away, so I knocked again with no answer. So I just opened the door and started cleaning. Everything goes smoothly, but then I hear that it's someone in the bedroom. So I knock on the door, and a male voice answers, "Don't come in." 20 seconds pass, and then my female coworker comes out of the room, wrapped in a blanket, and I could see the Swedish Prime Minister, Fredrik Reinfeldt, sitting on the bed wearing only his boxers. Shortly after, he and his wife divorced, and she was also in the government, which caused some problems for the party. I promised my coworker not to tell anyone, so this never came out to the press. We ended up dating the coworker for 2 years, and we would have a laugh about it from time to time. One time I went into the bathroom after my stepmom just got out of the bed as she was extremely tired. I turn on the light, and there's a grinder and short straw sitting on the counter area. I immediately knew something was up, and I took it out to her and asked her what it was as she got a glass of water. She grabbed it out of my hands and got defensive, saying it was none of my business. I was 16 years old and had enough knowledge to know she was crushing and snorting her pills. Not sure if she still does it, but it would explain why she stays up for days at a time and then crashes for almost an entire day, as crushing your pills can have some pretty bad adverse effects, especially since she was taking ADD medication. A friend of mine asked me once if I could root her smartphone. We were at a party with about 10 friends and friends of friends. A few of them were watching me do this. As I had some experience with finding things someone doesn't want me to see, I asked if there was anything I should not open, e.g. galleries, ES downloads. The answer was no. So I flashed recovery, uploaded SuperSue, and opened a file explorer to check. And everyone there saw pictures of weird things in, at, body parts where they simply don't belong. No more details here. I reacted fast enough so that everyone just thought there were only normal dudes. The owner realized that I must have seen more because I was looking really surprised and asked me later to not tell anyone. I was living in Oklahoma City about 15 years ago when I saw Dean Blevins, the local sports guy from the news, walk into a dirty little bar and sit next to a trashy guy and give him an envelope full of cash. It was the kind of place that only had 4 or 5 people at a time in it, and they haven't cleaned the bathroom in years, so he definitely stood out. Someone recognized him, and he got super nervous. The trashy guy says loud enough for everyone to hear, "Don't worry, I'm his agent." The guy had missing teeth and dirty clothes, so I doubt that he was actually an agent for the local news guy, but whatever. He could have been paying him for some landscaping work or housekeeping or something, but I remember the whole situation seeming very weird, and it stuck with me. 9th grade, lunchtime. Shoot, I forgot my wallet in my bag. I'll run back to the classroom and get it. I didn't even think about knocking because I figured the teacher ate lunch like a normal teacher. Nope. She was getting hammer blasted on her desk by her head teacher, VP. I turned right around and walked back to lunch. Never told a soul because I could care less. I wish I was banging Mrs. H too. That's right, she was a Mrs. I ended up mysteriously getting better algebra grades. I was a solid C student and started getting high B's the next 9 weeks. I definitely wasn't supposed to see it, but I think I was being subtly rewarded for not causing a big scene. My mom and dad have their own bathrooms separate from the kids' one. When I was around 12, I felt like a grown-up and wanted to use the grown-up bathroom. We had guests over that night, so while they were all downstairs talking, I went to the toilet, and on the top of the toilet was lined with cocaine, a cut-up straw, and a credit card. I don't know how 12-year-old me knew what it was, but I ran downstairs and told my dad there were drugs in the toilet. He obviously laughed and didn't believe me, but I dragged him upstairs and showed him. He asked me how I knew it was drugs, and I said, I don't know, it just is. I promise it's not mine, which he still laughs at for. My dad quietly told my mom, and we narrowed it down to my mom's friend, who'd kept disappearing to the bathroom. Long story short, we stopped being friends with that woman. She had a young baby with her that day as well. I have no idea what came of her, but I got her kicked out of my mom's group of friends for doing coke. When I was about 8, my dad was raising me by himself. Well, he partied all the time and always had his biker buddies over at the trailer 24/7, and I would always hang out with them and bum smoke sometimes. Well, one night they were having a huge bonfire. I heard screaming and fighting, and then I saw my dad beating the living hell out of this man. I mean, he was close to death. Well, my dad grabs him by the hair, tosses his ass in the fire, and the man jumped out of it kinda quick, and Dad just kicks the out of his jaw and sends him flying back in. Later on in life, when I was about 14, I learned that guy Dad about killed stole a couple of pounds of weed and coke from my dad and his friends. Dad passed away a few months later, and he told me he's sorry for all the effed shit I saw as a kid and not to grow up and be like him. But I'll never get the smell of that dude getting burned out of my head.